Watching question period and the other business of parliament can be one of the most disheartening things you can do as a voting member of Canadian society. You start to wonder who is even electing a lot of these activist, Liberal, and NDP MPs into parliament. They have no clue what they're doing when voting on a lot of policies, and they seem to just be genuinely nasty individuals who have no empathy for 75% of the general Canadian public. They only care about a specific subset of people that they've decided are those who they actually serve, and the rest of Canadians can go pack sand. And I think this is the perfect example. Garnet Genuy, a good Conservative MP from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, tries to get a single NDP MP to condemn all of the church arsons happening all over Canada. Check this out.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did want to ask this member a specific question about anti-Indigenous violence and reconciliation. One of the sad continuing examples of anti-Indigenous violence that we've seen in this country has been a series of attacks on churches and Indigenous communities. Many churches and Indigenous communities, sacred spaces for Indigenous Christians steeped in personal and familial traditions and sometimes containing important community records, have been vandalized or burned down. These acts of arson aren't just damaging to property, they're also very dangerous to human life. And I've noticed that we haven't heard anything from the NDP on these incidents. So I want to ask this member, will she join me in condemning these attacks on churches we've seen in Indigenous communities?
Extremely reasonable question. And she might think, well, this is a gotcha question. He's trying to put me into a corner. The only reason that this counts as a gotcha from Garnet Genuy is because it's so simple that anyone should be able to answer this question correctly. That will you condemn these church fires, these church burnings, arsons? And that you would just say yes. It's only a gotcha to this Leah Gazan lady because she is a genuine radical. And if she was to answer this correctly, even just for the political safety of it, her own base would come after her because, get this right. The NDP base, it's not just, like pro-union Canadians who want some more social assistance type programs and for benefits to be raised for unemployed Canadians or for union members or anything like that. No. A lot of the NDP base at this point are just radical progressives. And I think this really speaks to it here.
The honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
So I'm kind of concerned with this question because there seems to be a presumption of who's done it.
Who did he presume did it? He has said nobody. He has not even implied who a culprit is. He just said that there was a lot of churches being burned down in Indigenous communities. These are the churches of these Indigenous people, and it's obviously an aspect of truth and reconciliation to take the fact that their place of worship are being burnt to the ground. He didn't imply anybody specifically did it. If anything, the only thing that he should have presumed is that it's obviously a left-wing activist who's probably planning on voting for someone like Leah Gazan, but I'll let her continue and make a fool of herself.
So I'm not sure who's burning the churches and why he's relating it to this speech.
Goodness. This person is not smart enough to be in parliament. Just the way she talks, it's like she doesn't even understand the questions she's being asked. I'm not sure who's burning down these churches, and I'm not sure why this is being asked right now. Just answer the question, lady. Just at least come clean and say, I'm okay with churches being burnt down. Because this entire 3-minute clip is her basically slowly saying, who cares?
Is he insinuating that it's Indigenous people?
If anything, it wouldn't be Indigenous people. It's probably a white left-wing activist, because why would Indigenous people burn down a building that contains a lot of their birth records? That is what a lot of these old churches house, is their family birth records, in which it helps you prove your status as an Indigenous Canadian. It actually is unlikely to be an Indigenous person, and at no point did Garnet Genuy even imply it. He actually said these are very important buildings for the Indigenous people in these communities, and we should get to the bottom of who's doing it. But she can only play the race card because she is a empty-headed grifter.
Does he have proof of that? Because if he doesn't...
He never implied that it happened, so he doesn't need proof, idiot.
I would say that would be a stereotype. I would also call that racist.
Wow, she does?
So I would ask...
Wow, you called that racist? Wow, I didn't expect this from an NDP MP. Whoa, she called it racist? Guys, you can't inquire about church burnings anymore. It could be racist to do so. Leah Gazan has let us know.
Ask him first if he had proof, and then I would be willing to discuss it, because without knowing what the answer is. It's really hard for me to answer for him what the root of that issue is.
Sorry. So it matters to her who's burning the churches down in order to condemn church burnings. So if it was someone from a specific ethnic group or someone who was a specific sex, if they burned the church down, would she be less mad about it than if someone else burned the church down? So like a cis white male burns the church down, Leah Gazan's super mad. But if someone else burns the church down, maybe she's not so upset. And now Garnet Genuine has to like provide her proof of who might have burned the church down so she can speak out against it. Like, imagine this in any other context. Someone's murdered and you're like being said, well, you condemn political violence because it was like some political person who was murdered. And you're like, well, who did it? And like people are like, does it matter? And you're like, well, I just need to know what the motivations might have been. If someone was murdered, Leah, someone like in the churches are being burned down, and you need to know who the person was. That's nuts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just in follow up to my previous question, I thought my question was fairly clear. I characterized these attacks on churches as a form of anti-Indigenous violence. That is
a very smart thing for Garnet to have done. I don't think he's game playing here, but I think he asked the question in a very specific manner in order so that if she pulled out the race card, she would look like a complete circus clown.
Somebody it has in many cases burned down churches on Indigenous communities, and I see this as an attack on those communities. I thought that was clear in my initial question, but I'll repeat the point. I'm in no way making any assumptions or suggestions about who is doing this. I'm concerned about how these attacks on churches, they undermine the religious freedom, but also
Don't you know that religious freedom is far right, Garnet? I can't believe you.
They're an aspect of destruction of the cultural property of these Indigenous communities. And we have not heard from the NDP statements condemning these attacks on churches. So again, in the spirit of condemning anti-Indigenous violence, I wonder if the member would be willing to join us in condemning these various attacks on churches and Indigenous communities that we've seen.
I know that Garnet knows that Leah Gazan's too stupid to actually answer this question correctly, but this isn't even like a softball question. This is pure T-ball. After that first softball attempt, Garnet goes and explains to her how baseball works and then puts the softball on the post and just says, okay, now I just need you to swing and hit that ball. Can you do that for me? And as we will see, Leah Gazan is incapable of doing that.
The honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
Well, again, I give him the same response. I don't know what the motive was.
What was the motive? What was the motive? Maybe they were trying to save a bunch of children in the basement of this church and needed to burn it down. Maybe they were trying to fight white supremacy. That would make it okay. Like, who is this lady? Again, I go back to it. Did she just submit 1,000 box tops and was allowed to become the MP for Winnipeg Centre? Like, please, Winnipeg Centre voters, get rid of this lady. She has no clue what she's doing. She has no empathy for anyone outside of her political clan. It is disgusting to watch her just humming and hawing about actual terrorism against churches. And just because, well, maybe it's terrorism I like. Well, maybe it's good terrorism rather than bad terrorism. Maybe we should just be against crime and terrorism in general. I don't know about you guys. Maybe I'm being naive.
Who burned down the churches? And secondly,
maybe it was Professor Plum in the drawing room with a candlestick that burned down the churches. Like, why do we have to play a game of Clue before we're allowed to have a problem with churches burning down?
Because I don't know that, I can't call it anti-Indigenous violence. I don't.
See, that's her point. So if in her mind that this is actually what she is implying, if an Indigenous person burned down the church for seemingly pro-Indigenous reasons, that means it's actually not anti-Indigenous to burn down other Indigenous people's churches. I don't know if it was an Indigenous person. I actually would assume it's a white leftist, like I've mentioned before, because they tend to be the ones who are not going to care about burning these churches down and all the records that the community will lose. And you get a lot of very atheistic leftists, where I find that generally people who are more left-wing from other non-white communities tend to not have as much of a hate-on for religion. But man, that is crazy radical stuff. Thinking that you don't know if it's anti-Indigenous to burn down an Indigenous community's church, a church that basically only Indigenous people use, and that you've targeted as an institution within that community that people rely on.
I don't know if I haven't heard him debate anti-Indigenous violence when he talks about residential school denialism.
What does she mean by denialism? That like the people running around saying there was hundreds of children buried underneath church grounds and they were wrong after they actually start excavating? That's what she thinks is residential school denialism. What does she mean by the anti-Indigenous violence of that? So, and here's the thing with the left. They consider words they disagree with, even if those words are correct, to be more violent than actively burning down churches. That is more anti-Indigenous, is having a correct view that certain hype around mass graves were obviously wrong as residential schools are. You can't just make things up, because if anything, it just cheapens the tragedy of what happened in the past, the oppression of what happened in the past, to make up stuff about it today. And if anything, she's being anti-Indigenous by claiming that facts about history are anti-Indigenous. And again, nobody, especially Garnet Genuine, has argued that residential schools were good. Full stop. Nobody has done that. But in order to weasel her way out of actually giving a straight answer, condemning churches being burned to the ground, she is pretending that words are violence. Basically, historical fact is violence. If you deny that something happened when it factually did not happen because it's surrounding a tragedy or some historical oppression and abuse, that means that you're somehow being anti-Indigenous. Absolutely nutty.
I know what the motivation is for that. I know where it's coming from. They're very public about it. I don't have the facts. So I can't.
I don't think she has many facts at all. And not just on this topic. I don't think she has many facts on any topic.
Assume the motive. That's a basic premise in law. I think as legislators, we can understand.
I'm sorry, but she just has a dumb look on her face. It's this person just acting bubble-headed and empty-headed. I don't have a motivation to talk about. Well, there's no motivation for me to speak on right now. Well, why are you calling people anti-Indigenous for merely stating that a lot of the issues around mass graves were factually incorrect? How do you know their motives?
Understand that basic premise in law that I can't read into an action where I have no facts, and I don't know what the motive is. Maybe he should do some research. Maybe he would understand potential motives, or he could talk to officials.
Just talking until she's done talking, until she no longer has to answer anymore. She is just filibustering the questions so that she doesn't actually have to take them seriously. Disgusting. People like this should be removed from Parliament in the next election. Obviously not illegally removed, although she probably would assume I mean that if I didn't clarify. I just want to see what the polling looks like for Winnipeg Centre right now, the projections. I hope that we will not be seeing her after next election. Winnipeg Centre, oh goodness, she's not going anywhere. They give her an average of 62% for the next election in terms of likely turnout. They only give the Conservatives 12% in that area. Insane. Yeah, well, whatever. Facebook message me. I will attack them for that later. Anyways, that should be it for me today. I'll, come out with another video later. I just want to quickly mention that I, Wyatt Claypool, I'm running in the Calgary Signal Hill Conservative Party nomination. So if you live in that riding, buy a membership for me. Check out my website in the description below, wyattclaypool.com. And also, if you want, you can contribute to my legal fund, also linked in the description of this video. It's on Give, Send, Go. We have a billionaire developer suing myself and the National Telegraph. It's completely ridiculous. He has no evidence for the supposed defamation we have done against him. And so by contributing, you can help us with the legal costs that we've incurred, over $25,000 so far. We will win this case, but every dollar helps reduce the burden. Anyways, that should be it for me today. Have a good one, everyone.